Soviet Russia, when you come to the United States, you'll be told, look up Tarzan.
Miami in the mid-90s was open territory. Tarzan was the muscle for the Russian mob, but he wanted to move up.
He was getting richer and richer. Money counterfeiting, drug trade, and of course the sex trade.
Agents say the nude bar mixed the Russian mob with the Cali cartel.
The Colombians had the drugs, the Russians had the weapons.
Tarzan had a relationship with Pablo Escobar.
Feinberg says, my friends want a submarine. The admiral replies, with or without warheads.
Was he really going to do it? Could he really do it? Or was he just being the wannabe?
It was just so beyond belief.
It's stuff movies are made of.
Now, on Gangsters, Tarzan of the Underworld, Ludwig Feinberg. January 1993. 1 year since the collapse of the Soviet Union. U.S. President George H.W. Bush and his counterpart in Russia, Boris Yeltsin, signed the Second Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, banning the use of certain weapons of mass destruction.
With this agreement, the nuclear nightmare recedes more and more for ourselves, for our children, and for our grandchildren.
But this deal would never take effect.
We've had problems in the past, and we want a very clear, very precise, and very demanding verification.
Within months, another deal is underway in Moscow for the sale of sophisticated Cold War armaments.
With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a lot of chaos within Russia. Because of that chaos, a lot of government officials took advantage and became really corrupt, and they started to sell military hardware.
They had a surplus of armaments, missiles, firearms that were still in the hands of bribable military officials.
One gangster who could navigate the criminal culture in both the East and the West was bold enough to take advantage of the chaos.
He was able to make a deal for the purchase of helicopters that were going to be sold to Pablo Escobar's Colombian drug trafficking ring.
They were Mi-8s, heavy-lift former Soviet military helicopters. The asking price? Just under $1 million each. 6 gunships in total.
It was a simple situation. The Colombians had the drugs and the Russians had the weapons. They needed each other, and so it was a symbiotic relationship.
But the middleman in that relationship had just one problem.
He had not coordinated through the mafia for the helicopter deal.
The Russian mafia was a collective of various organized crime groups throughout Russia, known to be extensive and ruthless.
They like to barter in weapons, they like to barter in drugs, they like to barter in women. They even barter in enriched uranium, so there's nothing that they don't involve themselves in.
And so he found himself on the business end of a bad situation.
He's put into a conference room, these 2 guys who look like bodybuilders. Then one of them opens the window. They call Feinberg over.
Saw all these black limousines and SUVs and all these mafia thugs driving them, and he was scared to death.
In the dark room, facing an uncertain future, sat Leonid Ludwig Feinberg, better known as Tarzan.
The reason that he was called Tarzan is because he wore his hair in a large mane, very stringy, had a muscular build.
He was a big individual. He was about 6 foot, 6'1", steroid-enhanced body. He was intimidating.
The Ukrainian-born gangster also had a larger-than-life personality. one that helped him worm his way between two of the most feared organized crime groups on the planet.
He was brilliant. He was a go-getter. He knew how to handle people. He was charismatic.
He was a great intermediary. He could negotiate better than anybody. That's his biggest talent. And this is how he got connected to Colombian cartels.
Even before the helicopter deal with Pablo Escobar, Tarzan had been connected to criminal elements throughout the world.
In each of the cities or countries that he lived, he developed a knack for criminal activity, from torching businesses to extortions to prostitution.
Constantly on the run and engaged in crime everywhere he went, Tarzan found new opportunities on U.S. soil.
He really believed in the ill-conceived concept he created that the United States was a playground and he was untouchable.
He was kind of like a cockroach that just kind of flitted around, and whoever could provide him with money or criminal activities where he could make money, he was all up for it. He goes to New York and he starts to develop ties not only with other Russian mobsters, he also had the influence of Italian organized crime.
Within a few years, Tarzan moved into the big leagues, given the time and the crime, the American headquarters of the Colombian cartels.
Narcotics is a cash business.
With 70% of the nation's cocaine, marijuana, and methaqualone tablets are imported through South Florida, where the transactions for them are arranged in South Florida.
When he moved to Miami in the 1990s, he was nobody. He didn't have connections, so he purchased a lot of land and he started growing marijuana. This was his gateway drug that launched his empire.
He started a club there called Porky's, which was named after the comedy Porky's, which was also a house of prostitution.
He created an environment for like-minded criminals.
Porky's was a legitimate and illegitimate strip club out in Hialeah. It was probably what we call in the business a C-level club. It was not your high-end adult club. It was in a seedy area and it attracted, seedy people.
Colombians, Russian organized crime figures, they all came together there. They didn't come to discuss the weather. They didn't come to discuss sports. They came there to discuss crime and how can we make money together.
In less than a decade, Tarzan had gone from a Brooklyn street thug to a major player in Miami's criminal underworld.
From New York to Moscow to St. Petersburg, whenever a Russian was planning to come to South Florida, they would be told, look up Tarzan. He's the go-to guy. If you need any help getting drugs, he can get that for you. If you need girls, he can help you with that. If you need to collect money from somebody, he can help you get the money out of them. You name it, he can do it.
He diversified his business. He was involved in money counterfeiting, drug trade, and of course the sex trade.
Bootlegging cigarettes, liquor, running young ladies that were coming over from Russia.
For a few years, all he touched turned to gold.
He was getting richer and richer. He started enjoying the luxurious lifestyle that he had in Miami, and he thought that he could do whatever he wanted.
He could put himself in the fanciest cars, the best restaurants, but he was the personification of an evil individual. I mean, he just took from everybody. His greed was all-consuming. They would take money from strippers if they made too much in tips.
It was his greed and his ambition that would lead to trouble. There was no deal too big, no chance too dangerous.
This was a man who thought he was the cleverest Russian, Ukrainian gangster born. He had the chutzpah and the balls to go back and arrange a deal for the helicopters for the Colombians, but he had forgotten to pay a special fee to the mafia as a tribute. If you just did a deal where you should have paid them, the mafia is going to kill you.
You just don't walk through a door and think you're going to go into Russia and all of a sudden, because you're Tarzan, buy helicopters.
But that's exactly what he did. Tarzan walked out of that room in Moscow by turning his captors into his new best friends. The helicopters became part of his legend, even among authorities.
I don't know how he was able to do it.
He didn't stop there. Tarzan began to swing another deal, even more audacious than Soviet gunships.
It was just so beyond belief.
This case was the best one to tell at a party. People hear about a submarine with 40 tons of cocaine, and it makes for an exciting story.
The box office hit of 1966, with 10 weeks ranked #1, was a love story from Russia. Dr. Zhivago, an epic pre-Soviet romance, was based on the novel by Russian author Boris Pasternak. Even though no Russians acted in it, most weren't allowed to read the book or even see the film. The manuscript had been smuggled out of the Soviet Union in 1957. This is the world that Ludwig Feinberg was born into.
He was born in Odessa, that's the Ukrainian SSR, Socialist Republic, in 1958. Odessa is known as the city of contraband runners. They used to have many tunnels during the Second World War.
When Ludwig was young, his parents divorced and he lived with his mother, while his father remains a mystery. His stepfather was reportedly a man who could get goods for trade on the black market.
Everybody was doing that in order to survive. What I'm trying to say, something that Americans would think to be illegal, in that culture that was considered totally normal. What the Soviet system taught him is how to negotiate, how to get the deals done, how to find the right people.
The lessons he learned in Ukraine and the friends he made would stick with him all his life.
Ever since he was a teenager in the Ukraine, he is involved in criminal activity. That's all he's done. And I think he would tell you that.
When he was about 13 years old, his mother decided to go to Israel.
The Soviet Union seemed to be a society of equals, workers, but in reality it wasn't really equal. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, most Jewish communities realized that they would be better off if they would go to Israel. And back in those years, Israel was rapidly developing, so it seemed like a better place.
They lived in a kibbutz, a farming community in the countryside, alongside other families they knew from Ukraine. By then, he had a nickname.
As a young kid, he was well-built and had long flowing hair. He used to like to climb trees and jump to the ground, and he looked like a monkey. So they started calling him Tarzan.
It was his appearance, his hair, his boisterous, loud conduct. He was not a very suave or cultivated individual.
He wanted to join the military in Israel. He couldn't do it. He failed the exam.
He claimed he was a Jewish Soviet boxer, and then he moved to West Berlin, where he picked up with criminal groups there.
By the time Tarzan reached West Berlin, he was on his own.
He hooks up with a very violent mobster there by the name of Efim Laskin.
Laskov was known as the head of the Russian mafia in Berlin. They had extortion, they had racketeering, drug trade.
Laskin was a source of supply for weapons to the notorious subversive organization known as the Red Brigade.
The Red Brigade was responsible for a spate of terrorism in Europe throughout the 1970s. The group was notorious for high-profile kidnappings. Tarzan allegedly tried a similar scheme while in Berlin.
There's a situation where he and a couple of other thugs kidnap a banker and they want money.
The banker contacted another mafia group, so there was a battle. Tarzan was very lucky.
He reportedly escaped while his partners were beaten within an inch of their lives.
At that point in time, Feinberg decided, this is not the place for me.
He fled Berlin and